Our distinguished speaker, His Excellency Mr. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany, and Mrs. Elke Budenbender. To our SMU Honorary Patron, Dr. Tony Tan, our ex-President of Singapore, and to Mrs. Mary Tan, Minister Jacob, and Joan Pereira, and all the other SMU trustees, faculty, and friends. Welcome today to the Rih Hwa Leadership Lecture Series, which was established by my late mother, Mrs. Ho Lian Fong, in memory of my father, Mr. Rih Hwa, who was a former Singapore ambassador and business person. And incidentally, he was one of Singapore's early ambassadors to the EU and to Germany in the 1970s. As I told the president just now, and he asked me whether I had ever visited our embassy in Germany. It was Bonn at that time, and I replied that I was doing my national service, so I've never visited when my father was ambassador. The lecture series was set up to invite people, leaders from around the world, to give lectures that would benefit Singaporeans, and in particular, young people. And we're particularly delighted that the series has been graced by a series of eminent modern thought leaders, including most recently, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, then the UN Secretary General, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister of Singapore, two Nobel Peace Prize laureates, Aung San Suu Kyi of Burma, and Frederick William de Klerk, former President of South Africa. We've also had ex-presidents of the ASEAN countries, Mr. Benigno Aquino III of the Philippines, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia, Mr. Donald Tsang, the Chief Executive of Hong Kong, and of course, our very first inaugural speaker, who was Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding Prime Minister. Let me now tell you a little bit more about our guest speaker today, His Excellency Frank-Walter Steinmeier. After studying law and political science and then working as a research fellow at Justus Liebig University, Mr. Steinmeier moved to the State Chancellery of Land Lower Saxony. After working just 2 years as a desk officer, he became head of office to Mr. Gerhard Schroeder, Minister-President of Land Lower Saxony. He continued to expand his experience in various civil service roles and was appointed Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs in 2005 and was also working as a Deputy Chancellor from 2007. It was after this that he made a working visit here to Singapore in 2008, where he met with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So you are no stranger to our shores, sir. He has also met Minister Mentor Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, and they've exchanged views on various issues, including developments in ASEAN and the EU, and the challenges of regional integration. In 2009, he won a directly elected seat and became a member of the Federal Bundestag. 4 years later, he became Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs for the second time and served in this role until January 2017. He was elected as the 12th Federal President of the Federal Republic of Germany on the 12th of February 2017, not long before our own elected president, sir. As Federal President, Mr. Steinmeier has the task of unifying a society that, as I think all Europeans would acknowledge, Germany, no different than any other country in Europe today, has become increasingly polarized. And you have, as your president, President of Germany, spoken out on this issue. On the 3rd of October, the 27th anniversary of German reunification, and following Germany's national election, Mr. Steinmeier has said that the country is divided by new and less visible walls. Chancellor Angela Merkel had won a fourth term in office in the election, but the vote brought a far-right party into parliament for the first time in more than half a century. And this fractured vote means that she will have to govern with a far less stable coalition. President Steinmeier has said that these walls had sprung up, quote, between city and country, online and offline, poor and rich, old and young, walls from behind which people hardly understand anything of each other, unquote. A recent poll has showed that nearly 2/3 of Germans still see divisions between those in the former communist East and the West, a sort of Berlin Wall in their head, as it was. Such divisions are increasingly common in many parts of the world today, so there's much we can learn from each other in addressing the injustices and dangers that they bring. Federal President Steinmeier is renowned for his political and diplomatic skills. As former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder's Chief of Staff, he was one of the main architects of Schröder's 2003 package of economic reforms and welfare cuts, which has been credited with making the German economy more robust. As Foreign Minister, he has played a critical role in negotiating the nuclear deal between Iran and the West and was a key mediator in the Ukraine conflict. In short, President Steinmeier has spent his entire career in public service, giving much of his life to serving others. It is, in particular, a measure of the man rather than of the politician, that it is general knowledge and in the news, I think, except for many of us in Singapore, that President Steinmeier took several months from absence from politics to donate one of his kidneys to his wife. And she's truly your better half now, sir. It was a brave and rare gift of selfless love. It says a lot about the person. And in the Q&A afterwards, many of our students want to know more about the speaker, himself or herself as a human being, because today you're really, truly a role model, not just what you've done in the past, but as a role model to all young people everywhere. So thank you, President Steinmeier, for coming to speak to us. And may I ask all of you to join me in welcoming him to give his address. Thank you, sir.
Mr. President Tony Tan, Mrs. Tan, Mr. Minister, Mr. Chairman of the Board, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. First of all, it's a great honor to deliver the Rih Hwa lecture on my first visit as Federal President of Germany to your country, to Singapore. I can tell you from here, from this podium, it's a wonderful view. I see into faces of young and bright people, students of Singapore Management University and other universities in Singapore. And as the excellent reputation of this university reaches far beyond the borders of Singapore, I also see students, researchers, and guests from all over the world in this room, including, as I know, many of Germany. Deshalb auch meinen Landsleuten also ein ganz herzliches Willkommen an diesem heutigen Abend. I would like to welcome especially former President Tony Tan. Thank you for being with us today. My special thanks also to Ho Kwon Ping, the founding chairman of this university and our host tonight. Mr. Ho, with the rise of Singapore Management University, you have helped to educate a generation of future leaders who are keen and able to shape the path of this country, and something that has been especially important to you, not just for their own personal benefit, but for the common good. The great Lee Kuan Yew once said, Singapore has to continually reconstruct itself and keep its relevance to the world. Well, my dear students, one day that is going to be your task, and it is no small task. In my country, a young generation faces similar tasks as our European Union is for the time being struggling to define its role in this fast-changing world. So tonight, we will certainly have a lot to talk about. First of all, I would like to tell you about a picture I recently saw on the cover of a magazine. It shows a busy sidewalk in a big city. It could be Singapore, it could be Berlin. You see figures rushing past, typing on their smartphones, drinking from their paper coffee cups, walking their dog. Only one person in the background is not moving, a beggar sitting on the sidewalk. Now, this is what strikes you. All the passing figures are robots. Only the beggar is a human being. And one of the passing robots is throwing the human beggar a few pieces of loose change. What a grim vision. But I think it is emblematic of what many people in my country, Europe and the United States, where the magazine, The New Yorker, is from, what they feel when they look toward the future. They are fascinated on the one side, but they are feeling fear at the same time. Even though many of us are doing well, even though we live in the most prosperous era this world has ever seen, there is fear that things are going to get worse. This fear, my friends, must not take hold of us. And for that reason, it is important to look closely at where it's come from. I believe there are many sources of fear. First of all, technology is one of them. The digital revolution, the rapid spread of data technology, automation, robotics, all that is what the picture plays on. Another source comes from the enormous tectonic shifts on the global political stage. The rise of China, the uncertain role of the United States, the erosion of a rule-based international order, and the re-emergence of protectionism and barriers to trade. The credibility of the West as a normative project and a beacon of freedom, the rule of law and democracy is put into question. That is what I hope to discuss on this visit to Singapore and later in Australia and New Zealand. I'm trying to identify the elements of international order that we can hope to build together. So even though from Germany's point of view, I'm traveling east, I'm seeking the future of the West. Finally, and in connection with these tectonic political shifts, we are witnessing a new wave of crisis and conflict around the world. Terrorism, civil war, ethnic strife, displacement, mass migration. Even the threat of nuclear disaster has returned to this very region. In a world as interconnected as ours, none of these sources of fear is abstract or far away. Be it migration, climate change, growing inequality, or political polarization, in the end, it's about our societies. It's about the question, how will we live together in the future? That is what makes the picture in the magazine so striking. The question is, what will be the sidewalks of our cities look like in the future? But tonight I want to encourage you to ask a different question. Not how will we live together in 10, 20 or 30 years, but rather how do we want to live together in 10, 20 or 30 years. That is a privilege you have as students and researchers at a prestigious university like this one. You can take the long view. I saw that this year's 6 universities in Singapore are co-organizing a lecture series called Imagining the Next 50 Years. I think that's a bold approach, and it's something that we in Germany should do more often. We should look through a telescope into the future rather than just looking at the very next day, the next annual balance sheet, or the next election. So I want to ask you the following question. What future do you want your own country to have? Where do you see us in Europe heading? And most importantly, where do our visions overlap? What can we work on together? Firstly, I believe that our countries share a firm belief in the benefits of an open and interconnected world. Your former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong once said, Singapore cannot afford to have an inward, barricaded, small island mentality. And I can assure you that is 100% true for Germany in the same way. So let us defend the free and fair exchange of ideas, innovations, goods and services. And let us challenge those who say the opposite. I am convinced that in most cases, putting up walls and barriers will neither keep external problems outside nor create prosperity for those within. Secondly, an open world can only survive on the basis of international law and rules that apply to everyone. Our nations believe that peace depends on the strength of the law, not the law of the strong. So let us join forces in defending the rules. For example, in the interest of all concerned, we must work together for freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. Thirdly, we do not only believe in common rules, but also in common institutions. We believe in the value of constructive multilateralism, or to put it more bluntly, in getting things done together. There are many policy areas in which we already work successfully together, such as trade policy, climate change, and cybersecurity. But when I think of the cooperation between ASEAN and the European Union, much potential remains to be tapped. Fourthly, we share another important principle. Our country's success, and this applies both to the past and future, depends on our ability to innovate. It depends on technological leadership, research, and highly skilled workforce. On this visit, I am happy to learn about the collaboration between our universities, research institutes, and businesses, such as Siemens Digital Hub, the Technical University of Munich's TUM Create Institute, and Asia's first Fraunhofer Institute, all of which are here in Singapore. I believe we can be leaders in the digital revolution and the Industry 4.0. But I also believe that we need to steer this revolution not for the profit of a few, but for the benefit of society as a whole. So if you ask me what I want the sidewalks of our cities to look like in the future, I can tell you this much. I don't mind the robots, but I do mind the beggar. I want technology not to increase inequality, but to reduce it. Not to exclude people, but enable them to participate. Not to create poverty and disease, but eradicate them. As I speak here today, ladies and gentlemen, I must not forget to say happy birthday. This year you are celebrating ASEAN's 50th anniversary. ASEAN has been a great success story in fostering peace and cooperation here in this region. And despite all differences between this region and Europe, let me just say that as a German, I believe there is nothing more valuable in our recent history than the peace and the friendship with our neighbors built through the European Union. So I very much hope that we will do even more to share our experiences and expand our partnership between ASEAN and the EU. Now, sometimes when people from the ASEAN region ask me about the European Union, they assume that it was intended from the outset to become a global economic power that it is today. Let me tell you, that is by no means the case. The original intention was to bring peace to a continent ravaged by centuries of war. On this basis, the European Union grew closer and closer together. I grew up in the belief that the path of the European Union knows only one direction, namely further integration. And this belief has been shattered in recent years. The forces of disintegration and anti-European resentment have grown stronger, especially within the UK's decisions to leave the EU, but also in many other recent elections across Europe. Again and again we have learned that partnership and cohesion cannot be imposed by institutions or decrees from above, but must grow from below as people meet, build ties, debunk prejudices about each other, and form friendship. I believe we must do more to strengthen the ties among people, especially among the young, both in Europe and here in Asia. That is why Singapore was right to make people-to-people contacts as key priority as it assumes the chairmanship of ASEAN. For us in Europe, one of the most successful programs in this regard is called Erasmus. For the past 30 years, it has brought millions of young Europeans as exchange students to other European countries. Many of them have had the most formative experiences of their lives as Erasmus students, from starting businesses to falling in love. Perhaps an exchange program for students from Asian countries similar to our Erasmus program could be a great addition to Singapore's strategy. I'm sure that members of the European Union would be willing to share their experiences and even to look for opportunities for exchanges between ASEAN and EU students. Isn't it a great vision for future sidewalks, crowded with curious exchange students exploring each other's hometowns? Again, how do we want to live together in 10, 20, or 30 years? It's a big question, and we will find common answers, some of which I have mentioned, but we will also give different answers. Of course, there are profound differences in how we in Germany and you here in Singapore organize our societies. I am no fan of preaching to other countries about how to live, but I'm a fan of lively debate. I believe in discussing and defending the merits of what we do and why we do it. These debates are important because people don't automatically trust everything that authority or tradition tells them. In Germany, we have a story about an older man, maybe one with white hair, who has terrible pain in one of his legs. So he goes to the doctor. The doctor looks at him and says, "Oh, it's just old age. There is nothing I can do about it." "Impossible," the old man says. "You don't know what you're doing. The doctor says, "How dare you say that? I'm the doctor. I'm telling you, that is old age." And the man says, "Well, that can't be. My other leg is fine and it is exactly the same age." So people don't automatically believe and accept what authorities are saying. And I think that's in principle a good thing. It is good to take left and right, to take look at other corners of the world. It is good to ask, do things really have to be as they are? Can't they be better? I seek out these debates back home in my country, but also here with you today, because I know that the ideal of Western liberal democracy is by no means uncontested. These days, many people look at the European Union or the United States and say, well, this doesn't look very harmonious. And many people look at China and see stability and economic growth without a movement towards greater political freedom. So China poses a challenge to the West, not only an economic and geopolitical challenge, but also an ideological challenge. I recently invited a young intellectual named Parakana to my official residence in Berlin. He suggested that we learn from your country to value the output of government over the inputs, to value technocratic solutions over democratic elections, and to compromise. I would like to continue this debate with you here. How would you balance the inputs and outputs of governments? This involves many pressing policy questions. In the face of terrorist attacks or threats, for example, how do we reconcile the demands of security and freedom? Or in times of increasing ethnic diversity, how do we balance the need for social stability with the rights and freedoms of different ethnic and religious groups? How can we prevent radicalization? How can we ensure that everyone learns a common language? All these questions are especially pressing in my country, as we have taken in more than 1 million refugees over the past 2 years. So on this trip, I'm interested in learning more, especially from my colleague, your new president, about Singapore's long-standing experience in integrating different ethnicities. And not least, I want to ask how one reconciles the desire for social harmony with freedom of conscience and expression. If you ask my opinion, I think there is no inherent contradiction between democratic input and output. On the contrary, I think there is a positive link between the two. I think the broader political economic participation one has, the more successful a society becomes in the long term. In my experience, better results will be achieved by letting the arts, sciences, and civil society flourish freely rather than trying to direct their every move. In my experience, it's more convincing for the general public if one engages in debates with one's political opponents rather than excluding them. And in my experience, you are more likely to find out what's wrong in your society when you allow dissenting voices and scrutiny of free press rather than silencing them. I know it might sound almost paradoxical, but I think democracy's greatest strength, it is ability to discover and correct its own weakness. Democracy has a unique power to self-correct. I look forward to debating these issues with you in more detail because in the end there is only one answer to the question of how we will live together in the future, and that is you, the young people. Allow me to conclude my speech with one last story. When a wise man was asked by a young woman what the future would be like, he said, "The future is like the battle between two wolves. One is evil, it is violence, lies, and fear. The other one is good. It is peace, truth, and justice." So the young woman asked, "Which wolf will win?" And the wise man answered, "The one you feed." So you see, the future is uncertain, but it is up to you to shape it. So thank you for listening. First of all, I look forward to your questions now. Thank you.